Good morning. I'm wearing my Earth Day scarf. This is Jane Harmon, President and CEO of the Wilson Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you to an exciting all Wilson Center event that has been a long time in the making. The Wilson Center, as many of you know, is the #1 think tank in the world for regional studies, and it only makes sense that several of our regional and issue-based programs would join together to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. For the past few months, our Science and Technology Innovation Program, Environmental Change and Security Program, Latin American Program, and China Environment Program, that's a lot of mouthfuls, have been working together to create this event. While we had no idea it would be taking place virtually due to the coronavirus, we're forging on. Hopefully this and more global than it might have been originally. It also means that Mike Sfraga had to get up. I'm a recovering politician from California, where it is 6 a.m., the land of wildfires and earthquakes. So recognizing Earth Day is second nature to me, and I think I have recognized it, I'm disclosing something, all 50 years. And in fact, one of the reasons the Democratic Senator Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin, who launched the annual event in 1970 with California Republican Congressman Pete McGlosky, did so was after witnessing a massive oil spill in Santa Barbara. That the celebration of this day is the product of a bipartisan initiative is so refreshing, as news headlines worldwide are heartbreaking. A recent Wilson Center event hosted by our Environmental Change and Security Program highlighted that environmental change and human activity are part, not all, but part of the reason the COVID-19 pandemic happened in the first place, and why the virus spread so quickly. So today, our best and brightest, along with many special guests, are here to discuss solutions. The Wilson Center is proud to be the only think tank participating in Earth Challenge 2020, the world's largest citizen science initiative. With a new app on their phones, people around the globe can record air quality and plastic pollution data in their area. This will contribute to billions of data points and give policymakers, researchers, and the public more information about the health of our planet. I can imagine many of you are looking for things to do while sheltering in place, which is exactly where you should be. Maybe in an ironic twist, this is the best time to introduce this initiative. So if you've got a moment, download the Earth Challenge 2020 app and study plastic in your yard or air quality. Wilson Center's sweet spot, but it's not the only thing we're working on. Our China Environment Forum and Serious Games initiatives are working on an educational game, the plastic pipeline, to raise awareness of how plastic gets into the ocean and why it's so harmful, but also what you can do to stop it. And our Polar Initiative and the Harvard Kennedy School's Arctic Initiative recently released a report on plastic pollution in the Arctic Ocean, which we're presenting at an event tomorrow. The center is lucky to have the Earth Day Network and the U.S. Department of State's Eco Capitals Forum as partners on Earth Challenge 2020. We hope you enjoy the fruits of 3 years' labor and enjoy today's program. Next, we'll hear some remarks from Ruth Ann Stoke, the founding executive director of Smithsonian Conservation Commons. The Commons goal is to bring together scientists from across the Smithsonian Institution to imagine new ways to collaborate on environmental conservation. We look forward to hearing from Ruth about her work and to kicking off our first panel. Happy Earth Day 50 to the world from the Wilson Center, and especially from me, Jane Harmon. Please join me in welcoming Ruth Ann Stoke.
Thank you, Jane. And also thanks to Anders Beal for involving the Smithsonian in this event. We're very grateful to be involved. I still remember when I started at the Smithsonian, it was a few years ago. The Wilson Center was still on the fourth floor of the castle, and there were many distinguished scholars all over the world, from all over the world, working out of turrets that were overlooking the National Mall. So I have very fond memories, and we are so pleased that the Wilson Center is such an active and an exciting part of the Smithsonian network. And obviously, later today, you'll be hearing from Dennis Hayes. One of the great things about that story is that he worked in the Wilson Center in the Smithsonian Castle after organizing the first Earth Day. And I love the poetry of that connection. He will be speaking tomorrow during the Earth Optimism live broadcast, as well as several other speakers that you'll be hearing from this morning. I just wanted to explain something about our Earth Optimism initiative and why Wilson Center and a number of organizations have gotten involved with us on this. In 2015, Steve Momfort, who's now director of the Smithsonian's National Zoo, he and I and a few other people got a group of scientists together to talk about the future of our field work and how we could build better synergy with communities and with one another. And a number of the scientists pushed back on us and said, we're at the point where our work isn't going to mean anything if we don't change human attitudes towards nature. And if we can't engage our broader institution as a cultural leader in changing attitudes. So we all sat and talked about that. And fortunately, one of the members of this committee was Nancy Knowlton, the Sant Ocean chair of the Smithsonian at the time. She and a group of scientists from all over the world had organized an initiative called Ocean Optimism, in which and Ocean Optimism became the go-to place to find stories of success in the oceans. Because ironically, Nancy and her husband, Jeremy, were called Doctors Gloom and Doom because they were the ones calling attention to the loss of coral reefs. But what they were noticing was that there were successes everywhere, but no one was looking for them and no one was gathering them in one place. So the Smithsonian broader scientific community agreed to look into how we could look at success in the ocean and on land, and with species and with whole ecosystems. So the good news is that about this is that those of us who have a humanities background also got to be actively involved, because we realized an idea like this was going to take everybody, not just scientists, but everybody from different disciplines, people who serve as liaisons and administrators and communicators. So we're very pleased that the Earth Optimism movement has started to take hold. And we're pleased that we're able to talk about it on Earth Day. One of as many of you know, our Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama is participating today. Davey Klein, our great colleague who just joined us, is part of a broader initiative called Working Land and Seascapes, in which scientists really are doubling down on their efforts to work with communities and integrate more effectively real time with policymakers. So we're really glad we can be with you. At this moment of fear and doubt, Earth Optimism is all the more important. We're doing that as it relates to the pandemic we're facing now. We have to focus on what's working, and we have to replicate what's working. And we have to take the same approach to nature, to conserving our nature and cultural heritage. So that's what Earth Optimism is all about. And so we're really pleased to be part of this. And I wanted to mention that after this event today, as you all know, there will be many live events around Earth Day that have been organized by Earth Day Network. But later today, starting at 6, we will start a live stream, and you can find it on our earthoptimism.si.edu or on Twitter or Facebook. And then all day tomorrow and Friday, starting at 11 o'clock, we will have a live broadcast, and we'll feature more than 100 experts from around the world who are going to tell stories about things that are working. Please do look at our website and follow this event. It's going to be very exciting. And I'm so glad and honored that Wilson Center is kicking off this whole thing today. So thank you for bringing us all together, Jane.
Ruth, this is Mike Svrega. Thank you for those foundational comments and the insights. I think they serve really well to set the context for the first panel. So thank you on behalf of all of us. Jane, thank you for the opening comments. And let's now transition to the first panel, which is entitled Applying Innovation to Environmental Action, apropos, Ruth, to what your comments just covered, and I think complementary to them. And Ruth, we'd invite you to weigh in as you see fit during this panel, if that is fine with you. You'll stick around with us for a little bit? Okay, good. Great. Well, thank you. Let me just start with a few thoughts here, and then we'll transition to the panel. Earth Day 50 years on. Just from the comments today and just reflection on Earth Day, it's part celebration, it's part reflection, and part recognition, right? But in my opinion, more importantly, perhaps, is this clarion call to action. And it's in the title of this very conference. It's in the title of this panel. Ruth, you just talked about action-oriented work being done, the need for that. And so this idea of action has just been teased out over the course of the creation of this program today, but throughout all of the Earth Day activities. And we need action that's informed and influenced by research. We'll hear about that in a bit. We need action that is enabled through innovation, technology, and partnerships. Ruth, I think you nailed that one. And because, frankly, in this day and age, as we know, action is imperative. 5 decades ago, as you noted, Earth Day was in response to myriad environmental challenges facing our planet and society. And I remember it, and Earth Day was a sign of the times, right? Then as now. Unfortunately, that sign was flashing red a bit, and it's flashing again at us. But we can do things, as you noted. We can do things to make things better. We have the ability and hopefully the will to shape and create a better planet through global cooperation. Again, part of our title and effort here. And that better future is likely found at the nexus of policy, technology, and action. Again, these themes keep coming up over and over. I would also note, as Jane alluded to, almost 50 years ago, a little over 50 years ago, in February, 50 years ago, in a message to Congress, Senator Pell noted that the trustees of this newly created Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars had selected 2 key issues to focus on 70 years ago, almost at the same time as Earth Day. And they were, and I quote, 2 subjects on which they would like to see, that is the trustees, substantial studies undertaken and proposals developed during the opening period of the center. 1, the development of international law for ocean space. And 2, contemporary man and his deteriorating environment, with special attention to new forms of international cooperation needed to address certain widespread environmental problems. I find that this cycle, Ruth, you talked about, how these things have, everything old is new again. The clarion calls then are clarion calls now. And this nexus of policy, technology, action, innovation, they all seem to fit. So I'm just riffing off of your thoughts, but how interesting they are, and how interesting at that time, the nation's think tank too was influenced by the environmental movement and the need for policy that's informed through good research, good scholarship, data-informed actions. So Ruth, I'm riffing off of your themes. I stole several of them, but I think they so wonderfully set up this panel coming up. So again, please stick with us if that's okay.
Yeah.
And let me just briefly introduce our panel then. This panel was asked to do a number of things. In particular, the following question was highlighted for these panelists. And that question was, what are some of the existing efforts between scientists, innovators, researchers, and decision makers being used to understand complex environmental problems and to inform action? An easy task, I'm sure, for all three. But that's a pretty heady and long question to address, an issue to embrace. So we have three wonderful panelists, and Ruth is willing to stay with us, and so we're going to weave all of this together. Let me briefly introduce the three panelists, and then we'll work back up to the beginning panelists to begin the presentation. So as I said, we have three. Our first panelist is Dr. Maesa Rojas, Associate Professor, Universidad de Chile. She is chair of the scientific committee for COP25. We then have Dr. Shannon McLean, program lead for risk reduction and resilience at NASA and partnerships manager for Earth Sciences Division, and Dr. Winnie Lau, senior officer preventing oceans plastics at the Pew Charitable Trusts. Those are our three wonderful panelists. Let me, before we start, share a reminder from the Wilson Center. If you have questions while we're going through this session, please send your questions to STIP, S-T-I-P, at wilsoncenter.org, or you can tag STIP on Twitter using the handle @WilsonStip. And for those of you who are hashtag fans, you can use hashtag EarthDayAtWilson in your posts. With that, and with a reminder that the panelists have been asked to tease out for us the existing efforts between scientists, innovators, researchers, and decision makers to understand complex environmental problems and to inform action, I now turn the virtual floor over to Maesa. Please take the floor.
Good morning. Well, thank you very much for this invitation and for having the opportunity to speak at this Earth Day in a very particular moment of our lives. And the incredible thing, it is an incredible moment of a common life wherever we are. I heard we have people in the US, but even in Alaska, so from all over the Americas, from the very far north to the very far south. And this is quite extraordinary to be living a moment where we have all this incredibly intense shared experience. So I can't really start talking without talking about the pandemic. I think that there is no way out of that, because this pandemic has given us, in a very short amount of time, so many new and unprecedented events in all aspects of our life. And one of them clearly is, for us that work in the science field, is this: we have never seen the international community raising really together to solve this problem. We have probably never seen so many scientists in the news, in being appreciated for what they are doing, and working in an enormous amount of cooperation. And so in all those senses, it is really quite extraordinary what we're seeing. We're being scientists are being appreciated by the public, but also by politicians. One, I would say, sort of threat that has also become very apparent is that the way we do science is through transparently sharing data, making our methods clear and open. That's very important, and that's how we do science in our whatever field of science we come from, right? But it is so evident now that this is really critical to solve this pandemic, to have data, to share them, to have at the table lots of different disciplines, because this is not just the medics that have, or the epidemiologist or virologist or expert in public health. We have been now needing to talk also with experts in psychologists, psychiatrists, economists. It is really quite an enormous amount of expertise that we have to draw from to solve all aspects of this pandemic. And in that sense, it's an incredible experiment to see how all these things come together. And for us that we work on climate change, this is all actually quite known, right? Because the climate change as well cannot be addressed just by a climatologist or a economist or a sociologist, etc. And even in the climate or in the earth sciences, there are many different disciplines that we need to understand, fully comprehend the magnitude of the problem. And so we have seen, and I will immediately talk to the experience in my country, which is Chile, is the really important role of having good science advisors for being able to make decisions in this incredibly complex and moment that has so many different aspects to it. We need good science advisors. But the truth is, if you look around in the world, and the US has, of course, great science advisor institutionalized, most countries do not have it. Most countries don't have institutionalized science advising systems. And this is probably especially true in developing countries or in the global south. In the case of Chile, we have a science ministry. We have a science ministry that's very young. It's exactly like a year and a half old. And let me now come to my area of expertise, which is climate change. Chile decided to host last year, a bit over a year ago, the next conference of the parties of the UNFCCC, of the Framework Convention for Climate Change, known as COP25. And when Chile took the decision to host COP25, of course, this is a job that usually is done by foreign ministries and by environmental ministries. Our government decided to involve the newly created science ministry as well, so that whatever had to be done in the organization of the COP, it could also count with advice from science. And that's where I got involved. I was asked to coordinate the scientific committee for COP25. And it was, so as I said, the science ministry had just started. It was really, really very freshly installed. And they asked us then they give us a very broad mandate to bring evidence to the whole process. But we didn't really know much more what to do. And the result of this exercise, which was in a way a little bit of an experiment, was quite extraordinary. If you had asked me before how many scientists we have in Chile that work on climate change, I would have said, oh, I don't know, 100, maybe 200. The result is that we managed to convene over 600 scientists that worked in one or another aspect of climate change. And we worked very hard over 8 or 9 months and produced 19 reports with recommendations for policymakers on very diverse area, from, of course, mitigation and adaptation to climate change, to governance to climate change, biodiversity, water, cities, the cryosphere, the ocean, etc. So it was an extraordinary exercise of bringing the research community together. We did not do this in isolation. Most of the work was done in very close collaboration with the public sector, but also very interesting with the private sector as well. And many of the recommendations were done together as well. And in many cases, I think the scientific community helped as a hinge between sectors that had not been discussing things together. So this is an experience of a country with that could harness the enormous, the really enormous resources they had, and probably untapped resources for the country in science and technology and in innovation, to bring that and close the gap of this bridge, or making this bridge between a sector that works mainly at universities and research centers and the public sectors that is in charge of making the public policy. So, and I would say that all of that we learned, and we are happy that this scientific committee was not just there for COP25, but it is now institutionalized in the Ministry of Science. And we are now institutionalizing also our relationship with all these sectorial ministries, and how we will continue to cooperate, to being there to help in, at least in climate change, to bring that evidence into the decision-making world. So it was an experiment that was very fruitful, and I'm very happy that it has been very valued. Now, that same experience has now been tried to be replicated in all this pandemic, and the science minister has been very involved in how Chile is addressing the pandemic. And here, maybe in our case, the innovation part of the research wasn't so obvious. But now with the pandemic, and with the lack of, for example, ventilators, with the lack of mechanical ventilators for hospitals, the lack of dressing, of I don't know the word in English now, but you know what I mean, what the gloves and personal protection for health workers, they have been able to activate loads of engineering faculties, loads of laboratories to make the test, etc. So it has been, I think, it is an extraordinary example on how when you have at least some level of institutionalized science advisory in a country, how you can quickly harness everything that is done to help addressing these complex issues.
Well, thank you. That was a tour de force of a lot of different things. I want to be, so just bear with me here as I blow up our agenda just a little bit. Maesa, just a couple of things to think about when we come back after the panel. A couple of things to think about that I may want you to further tease out. And then Ruth, I'm going to ask you a quick question and then move on. You mentioned, Maesa, the idea of researchers and policymakers, scientists and policymakers speaking together, maybe at this fulcrum, right? This nexus of research informing policy during the COP25 development. It's a discussion we've had here in the United States. We've held these discussions at Wilson and elsewhere. And that is, we brought in Arctic researchers, the research community, to literally speak to decision makers and policymakers. And never the twins shall meet. They speak different languages, right? They come from very different places. Policymakers want to know X, Y, and Z about a particular thing, and researchers want to do their work, but they also want to know what policymakers want. And policymakers want the researchers to so there's like a translation that happens. And so I'd be very interested in revisiting this with you as it played out in Chile. Ruth, I'm not sure of your time, and we sure don't want to take all that much more of your time, but I'm interested in what Maesa said before about sort of the using international structures, in this case for Chile, domestic to international. Your work with Smithsonian here in the United States, I'm wondering about the international component of that. Is there one? How does that work? Because that's really the crux of this, is that how do we get science and research out to community and community to action? So again, I've just blown up our agenda just a little bit, but bear with me. But Ruth, I want to give you a chance to wait for a moment.
Thank you. Oh, well, we're working in, we have people working in the field in more than 120 countries. What can I say? One of the things I think we've been learning is that parachuting in, getting the work done, publishing the data is only a very small piece of the story. And I think that where we're going is a lot more community oriented, much more integrated, and I think also there has been a skittishness to stay away from policy. And I think what she's just outlined is a situation where it's all coming together. You can't separate it anymore. And it's going to be challenging, I think, because, scientists do want to remain independent. And yet there's a longing, I think, for people to join forces and to be better connected. So even what we're doing today is a great symbol of that.
Thank you. And Ruth, again, I'm not sure if you just tell us when you have to go.
Okay, great. This is riveting. I'm really enjoying it. I'm really fascinated too with the idea of scientists serving as hinges. I hadn't heard that expressed before this morning. Very cool idea. Yeah. That scientists as a group are now revered in a way that they were not, and it's just I'm going to have to think about that a lot.
Yeah, that's why I wrote it down. I mean, Maesa, you may have just coined some kind of phrase here that many of us are going to write about. I think, because that is a hinging. I mean, we've talked to our colleagues who are in the Arctic research community, and there's a whole NSF program called Search, and they, with us, are trying to figure out that hinge is how do we bring these two communities together, where a lot of things play out in that, not gray zone, but in that hinge. And so we might have just formulated, I don't know, a new conceptual framework. So Ruth, I'm glad you can stay with us, and please let me bother you every once in a while, like I just did. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Maesa. We'll come back to that. Shana, on to you and your comments now. We have voted you the coolest background out of any of us, by the way. So you have that dubious honor, but please, I'll turn the virtual floor over to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And happy Earth Day 50, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you virtually, of course. NASA. NASA is very well known as a science agency. A lot of our efforts are, of course, focused on space and the innovations that come along with it. But one of the jokes I like to make is that Earth is a planet too. It's my favorite planet, and it's where all of the work that I do is focused. And of course, it's the focus of today's discussion. So within Earth Sciences, we have quite a robust number of activities, some focused on research and application, some on flight capabilities, and others where I'm housed in the applied sciences realm. And so really every every effort that we're engaged in within the applied sciences program is ensuring that the data products that are developed or the platforms that we are creating has a user and a set of decisions in mind. One of the benefits I would also say, and going back to one of Maisa's points, is the fact that all of NASA's data is open and free. And so this isn't always the case with a number of other space agencies for a variety of reasons, but it is something that we hold in high regard in the efforts to be able to bring our capabilities to as many people as possible. When I started with NASA, I was incredibly excited because I'm not a data scientist, I'm not an engineer, and that's the typical person that works at NASA. I am an environmental scientist, I'm a policy and social scientist, and so I represented somewhat of a new shift for the way that NASA wanted to do work in earth sciences. And I loved the fact that we could say that we see Earth as a system, that we see environmental change. We can see health of ecosystems, but we can also see deforestation, pollution, and loss of different environments. But one of the elements that I did think was missing, because I'm very interested, I came to NASA from working previously with the UN, and a lot of my work is more focused on the humanitarian element of things and operational aspects of linking science and decision making. I was interested to find that at NASA, we weren't really integrating the human dimension into this concept of seeing Earth as a system. And of course, if we're talking about fragility, crisis, conflict, a lot of this happens because of the nexus between the human and environmental dimensions. So that's one effort that I really try to focus on with my work. And then the second would be the approach that we use to engage the end user, so to speak. I think academia tends to be a common partner of ours, but because of my humanitarian background, I was really interested in seeing where we could go if we started exploring partnerships with humanitarian actors. A lot of the approaches that NASA use are often those of many scientists, where we've got somebody in a lab creating something, trying to see how innovative and how far we can go, which is desperately needed. But on the other hand, I want to know what it's going to do to help people on the ground that are facing real world problems and looking for future ways of preventing or mitigating some of the crisis situations that we see. And so my role, both in leading the risk reduction and resilience elements of NASA and managing the global partnerships platform for the Earth Sciences Division, has allowed me to explore, I think, specifically these two gaps. I do this specifically by partnering with other organizations. I think NASA does amazing work and we have incredible scientists, but we're only part of the solution, which has already been stated today, right? I mean, we need to take interdisciplinary approaches. I come from an interdisciplinary background. And so I think what I've really tried to do is find partners who are interested in solving these types of complexities with me. It does take, to an earlier point, a bit of translation. I've got a bunch of data scientists on one side that want to talk about statistics, and I've got humanitarian organizations and policymakers that want to talk a different language entirely. But it's really been a lot of, I think, what's been interesting and exciting about my job in creating new.
So we'll wait for our colleague to come back on, but sorry, Ruth, I have another question, and then Winnie, we'll move on to you, and then maybe come back to Shana. But the question is, programs like what NASA has available, I mean, having that incredible, institution to support some of this kind of work around the globe, to what degree, I'm sure, but to what degree do you work with NASA in applying your work informed by what Shana was just talking about. Looks like she's back with us, but
Yeah, sorry, I cut
that's
out.
okay. That's okay. Well, Ruth,
Good.
maybe what we'll do is if it's okay, we'll hang on that question and go back.
Yeah.
Shana, we missed you. I'm not sure where. I think we missed you at the point where you were discussing you deal with people who speak different languages.
Yes, precisely. So I would just end really with an example of a partnership that we have, which is with Mercy Corps, a humanitarian organization headquartered out of Portland, Oregon. But their work is global, as is ours. And so what we've really tried to do is try to find these complementary perspectives at bridging the science policy gap and then the science and action, science to action gap. And so we're working currently with Mercy Corps in the Sahel, a very crisis-affected region that's facing a number of complexities. But their approach is one that I really admire. They ask a series of questions, such as, with whom are they trying to build resilience? For what are they building resilience, and through what implementations, what kind of measures or mechanisms are they attempting to build resilience in these contexts? And so with working with them, it's been amazing to see the complementarity that we can create with Earth observations and the approaches that Mercy Corps uses. When you ask, what am I trying to build resilience to? These are shocks and stresses. These are elements of environmental and climate change that we can see very well with Earth observations. When you're talking about for whom am I building resilience, this is about scale and timing and populations. And so are we looking at global elements, regional, national, local? All of these things can be achieved with Earth observations. And so I think what you're seeing is an ability to visualize some of the challenges in ways that maybe you were only able to really get a hyper-localized perspective when working on the ground. And so there's a gap that's bridged in our ability to not just understand the problem, but understand what it means when moving forward and creating the policies and the activities that we need to programmatically to really change. And so through that, because Mercy Corps works with local communities, with national governments, and any partnership that we're engaged with them on, we do the same. It allows us to then take the science that we're developing and directly inform policy and action in the various settings where we're working. And I would just say, I think, the translation role was quite difficult to begin with because of these two different approaches. But it's really been amazing to see once we got on the same page that, maybe we're not talking 30-meter resolution. We're now understanding that maybe we're looking at a village or a settlement or a community. But it has really changed the way that we do science, the way that we approach the methodologies so that we're actually tending more towards human-centered design, working with the partner to make sure that whatever's developed is not just relevant to the question at hand, but also capable of being integrated and usable by the people who are asking the questions and those who are actually implementing the different policies and actions on the ground. And so I'll leave it there, but I think partnerships are really a way to highlight how you can hit these marks with solving complexities that are not solved by just one institution or one entity. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for dealing with the hurdles of technology. Perhaps ironic that you're there, represent NASA, and we had a little bit of a problem. So, but thank you so much.
It's another joke I make all the time.
I'm sure you do. But thank you for that. One of the things I do want to come back. We'll go to Winnie and then back to Ruth and then loop around. We've got some questions coming in. I obviously have some questions and maybe a discussion amongst us here over coffee. But one thing, Shana, is, it strikes me that although we all celebrate NASA's role here, it's a powerful, powerful role, especially going from the 30-meter resolution to villages and settlements and showing us the bigger patterns. I would ask the question, I think I know the answer, but just contemplate this when we come back. Why? Why is NASA doing this? People associate NASA with a certain set of project missions, right? So where was the shift in here? Who informed that shift? What's your role in informing that shift? And what's the feedback loop from communities being served by NASA's capacities, capabilities, and expertise? So those are just some of the questions I have, but more importantly, we've got people online who are providing questions. So we'll come back to that. Winnie, please allow you to take the virtual floor. Very interested in your comments from Pew's perspective, related to oceans plastic, but of course other matters as well. Please.
Thank you, Mike. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you on this 50th anniversary of Earth Day. The journey I'm about to share with you is one that I hope will give us something to celebrate on future Earth Days. Plastic. Until recently, it's been hard to miss all the stories about the havoc that plastic pollution has wreaked on our oceans. There's been a constant drumbeat of scientific and news articles telling us yet another new shocking fact. Plastic has been found in the deepest part of the ocean, the Mariana Trench. Whales and dolphins are washing up dead on shores around the world with dozens and dozens of plastic bags in their stomachs. And microplastic fibers have even been found now in our drinking water. So the news is sobering and more urgent each day. But I'm here to share with you some exciting work that my organization, the Pew Charitable Trust, is doing to develop a global roadmap, a plan, to get to a future with near zero plastic getting into the ocean. To support the development of this ambitious plan, we undertook 2 new analyses closely with key partners to provide the scientific evidence base needed for action. So the first analysis was with our partner Systemic, where in our 2-year effort together, we wanted to shed some light on how we can tackle the ocean plastic problem. We started with a bold idea that we would model the global plastic system and evaluate multiple strategies for how to stop plastic from getting into the ocean. From the beginning, we knew that this would be a huge undertaking and one that would require many smart and dedicated individuals and organizations. So we started by assembling a team of 17 global experts with knowledge and experience encompassing the whole plastic system and around the world. These experts hail from academia, business, government, and nonprofit organizations. We also brought on board 4 thought partners: the University of Oxford, the University of Leeds, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and Common Seas. I guess you can say we assembled our very own interdisciplinary team of superheroes to fight plastic pollution. So we quickly got to work, got to know one another through our first gathering together in London about almost 2 years ago now, and got right down to work by mapping the key stocks and flows of the ocean, of the entire plastic system, from production to waste disposal, and also, unfortunately, what leaks into the ocean. Over 3 more gatherings with numerous virtual meetings, like what we're doing, this group debated differences between geographies and plastic types. After all, plastic is consumed locally and its waste also managed locally. Countries of different income levels and urban centers versus rural areas have differences in what and how much they consume and the capacities for handling the waste plastic. The discussions also revealed that we needed to track different plastic types as they are used in different products and determine whether they will be recycled or disposed or leak into the ocean. We also had deep discussions about what scenarios we would model. A business as usual trajectory was obvious. We also wanted to see how much difference commitments already made, but yet to be implemented by governments and industry would make. There have been proposals to focus on waste disposal, ones on recycling, and ones on reducing plastic production and substituting to other materials. And we also wanted to see where we would get to if we implemented all of the above. So if what I have already shared with you sounds challenging enough, The most ambitious part of our work yet was coming up with all of the data. For the 8 geographic archetypes that we divided the world into, the 3 plastic types we analyzed separately, and then all of it across the whole plastic system, and then projected 20 years out to 2040. We also estimated the associated socioeconomic impacts, such as costs, greenhouse gas emissions, and jobs, to better understand the trade-offs. So we, of course, scoured the scientific literature and global databases, but that was not enough. Our team of experts and partners provided data they themselves had collected. We also reached out to dozens of contributors in our networks who could point us to the other data that they know about, as well as provide industry-specific data that had not been published. We fed this rich data set we assembled into our global plastic model. I'm happy to share with you that this nearly 2-year effort with our partner Systemic, our panel of experts, 4 thought partners, the dozens of contributors, and a team of peer reviewers is nearing the end. Our report detailing all of this work and the results will be released in the next few weeks. Now, however, I won't scoop ourselves by giving away our punchlines just yet, but I will share a couple of teasers with you. The first is that there is no single solution that can solve this problem. It will require a global, concerted approach. The good news, though, is that there is a scenario whereby a credible pathway exists towards stopping plastic from getting into the ocean in the first place. But I'll be honest with you, this path will not be an easy one, but it does exist. For the second piece of work, we partnered with Duke University and our thought partner Common Seas to conduct a global policy landscape analysis to understand the responses so far by governments to this plastic pollution problem. The news is encouraging. Governments around the world have been ramping up efforts and increasing the scope of their policies. This is just the beginning. With a credible pathway and a map of government efforts in hand, we have begun putting together the global roadmap. We are working with the many partners from both analyses as well as some new ones to devise this plan. We aim to share this global roadmap with the world in June and hope that it will catalyze the ambition and actions needed. And I hope that at another Earth Day celebration in the near future, I can come back to tell you that we are well on our way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Winnie. I think you have a collective invite for a date to be determined for you to do exactly that. Way to tease it up for us. And as Jane noted, we have a plastics, Arctic Ocean plastics program tomorrow at Wilson. So if you'd like to share any of those insights with me privately, I can sneak them in tomorrow if you'd like.
We'll have a chat after.
Okay, but you know that's a substantial that's wonderful to hear on many levels, because you're right. I mean, plastics have permeated everything, both poles, you know, our entire food chain. It's wonderful to hear of this roadmap, and I also hope that this roadmap, I would suspect. By the way, we have now transitioned to a discussion amongst us all. If you haven't already caught that, I would suspect that this roadmap has on and off ramps, and by that I mean I'm making this up, but by that I mean that there's on ramps for, you know, Ruth's organization, for organizations like think tanks, for NASA, for work that's happening with COP25. I mean, for all of us on this call and, you know, on the screens, but also on this call, that there'd be on ramps for other organizations to take what Pew has now outlined in the roadmap, and for each sector, whatever sector that is, to be a part of that highway, that roadmap that you've provided with different lanes. So I'd be interested in if you can share, when we cycle back around, share some of those thoughts that you might have on that, and then off ramps. You know, when the time is right, what does it look like when things are better, and you revise your plans and they're informed by hopefully good progress being made. But that's outstanding news to hear from Pew and all of your partners. What a great underscore and highlight of the very title of this panel. I think probably what I'd like to do, if it's okay, is to go back. We've got several questions coming in. It's 6, well, it's 10 there or so. We've got about another 25 minutes. We've got a number of questions coming in for all of the panelists, but maybe I'd like to start, Mayes, if I can just go back to you where we started, and ask you to revisit the issue of this communication, right? The hinge that Ruth noted, how that teased out, and what you see in the future for that, because I think that is key if we're going to address not just the panel theme, but to make some change here as we go forward. And my sense is the pandemic will push this a bit more, but also the growing climate crisis and related issues will push this a little more. And I just see that, I might be wrong, but I just see that issue so important for us to move forward on any of these agendas. So can you tease out for us a little bit more on that?
Okay, I mean, I don't know if this is anecdotal, this is just like how it played out in Chile, but given that it was such a huge response, I really doubt that it is just anecdotal to the group of people that happen to be there. So I think there's globally this view of a scientist of, well, there are many stereotypes, right? But one of them is that the scientist is someone who speaks in a very complicated language, who works in front of the computer or in the lab and has very little communication to the rest of the world. And I think that stereotype, although I agree that it has some truth to it, what we notice is that when we were genuinely asked by a high-level authority, which, I mean, in our case, the mandate came from the president down, and then it was the science minister who actually sort of implemented it, that the scientists were very, very willing to engage. So we felt that we had a counterpart who was willing to engage with us, and hence make that effort as well to listen to scientists, and then that we were also more or less able to make that effort. Right at the end is it's if there's motivation, I think we can all learn to speak different languages. And my own experience is, so I also direct a center. It's called Center for Climate and Resilience Research, and we have different research lines, and we thrive to be interdisciplinary, and it has been a complicated task. And the last time we really thought about this, we decided, well, we're going to separate our research line that are from the beginning out interdisciplinary. So I, as a climatologist, my background is in physics. I have a PhD in atmospheric physics. I ended up in a research line that is about governance and science policy interface. So I'm the only natural scientist in a group of lots of social scientists there. And it has been an incredible learning experience for myself to be there. And I guess I could use that experience then to try to join all those bridges that we had. So the language problem, I agree it exists, but if we actually come together, then we could try to eliminate those stereotypes and that's really critical.
Ruth, what are your thoughts on that? Because then I have some questions both for Winnie and Shana as well from those watching online.
I think it's a great time to be alive. This is amazing. Because
cheers to that.
Well, yes, it's important to have disciplinary expertise, but it's also very important who you are as a person and how you relate to these other people. And it's so much, there is just so much more to this now. I think we're all acknowledging it, and we're able to cross these lines. And sometimes, you asked before how we collaborate with NASA. I mean, I wouldn't even begin to answer the question. In many cases, NASA is helping us with communications. NASA is supplying even a host for our live summit tomorrow. So, but also they work across with our anthropologists. They work with our traveling exhibition service. I mean, there are so many different ways. And I just also wanted to say something about the plastics initiative, which is, we're a very strange beast, because on the one hand, we have scientists working upstream on a lot of issues and collecting data and publishing, but we also feed 30 million people a year. We sell products in our stores. We have cafes. So a zero waste initiative across the Smithsonian is underway. It's hard to make announcements because change across a very complex institution is hard to do. I don't mean to take this on to the Smithsonian again, but I'm just saying that it's taking people of different disciplinary focus. It's taking all of us to figure these things out.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think it's good that you point out Smithsonian. I mean, I think we are all represented here by iconic organizations. I mean, every one of us here on this panel represent organizations that can move the dial. But it starts with these kind of discussions, and actually the action part of this that I started my riff on, off of your riff, which was it's up to us. We can have nice logos, and by the way, again, Shana has the best logo here, but unless we do something with them, and that's been what I've been trying to tease out here, is that 50 years ago, so many wonderful people, I mean, actually, back to Rachel Carson, but 50 years ago, there was a vision to celebrate, but have action. And here we are 50 years later, we've made some nice steps, but there's so much more to do. What's compelling to me about the Pollyanna side of me here is that what has been built, and all of you have spoken about this, what has been built, it's kind of like the evolution of research universities and other university organizations, which are these disciplinary silos. And really these drivers, climate and other things, have forced us to take a look at these silos and just bust them, because there's no way you can address any of the issues before us without having an interdisciplinary approach. Not just disciplinary, but who is in the approach? Is it an organization like NASA working with Pew, working with Smithsonian, working with those climatologists in Chile and COP25? I mean, you have to have all of us in this. And that's why I'll be fascinated to see how Pew actually works this very complicated process out on their roadmap to build the lanes of the roadmap, because there's so many pieces here. So thank you, Ruth, for that. Shana, I wanted to get back to you for a moment. Again, I promise we'll get back online here. We've got still 30 minutes, so that's good for the questions. But the issue of why? Why is NASA working in the Sahel? Why is NASA working with Smithsonian? It's not Mars rovers, right? So what's I know it's part of the mission, but I'd like to know a little bit more about the drivers within NASA to actually work on these broader, or maybe not so much broader pictures and broader missions.
Yeah, it's really interesting, I think, because there's a part of the Earth Sciences Division that just dedicates itself to helping people realize how much the work that we do affects everybody's daily lives, full stop. The innovations that have brought us to space are ones that we use every day in our homes. And so I think when you think about our role as a trusted source of science and a leader in innovations, that's really the answer. The reason why we're trying to do this is because we're trying to push the needle. We're trying to be part of offering what's possible in the way that we can, through Earth observations, through satellites, science, data products, and really visualizing change in ways that not everybody is able to do. And I think part of that is also representing a growth that we're making as an agency. the evolution for us is also about becoming more interdisciplinary and breaking out of, seeing water and food security or disasters as independent program areas, but instead part of a larger discussion of how these all come together and influence the situations that we live in and face today. And so in pursuing innovation, I think on our side, it's also, if we say we see Earth as a system, are we seeing it as part of its individual parts, or are we able to actually start integrating and move forward on the way that we look at these complex systemic issues? And that's a data and science side of innovation that not everybody's been able to get to. We know it's a system, we know market systems, we know lifelines, but being able to visualize that, being able to take data sets and different approaches that we've used and bring them together to start looking truly at the Earth as a system is our side of the innovation. And then it's through our partnerships that allow us to really bring it home to real world solutions. And so again, I mean, I think we represent the science and innovation side. There's a huge push to really move in that direction, but it's only through partnership, I think, frankly, that we really see these the science fully realized.
Thank you. I'm really trying not to ask another question and going to our questions online now. I have, I don't know, 4 pages of questions. Winnie, a lot here on plastics, but there's one that caught my eye. And here's a question, and I think I'm reading it, word for word. So let me do that and then ask each of you to respond. Here's the question. We know women are disproportionately impacted by climate change, but can also offer innovative solutions. How can global leaders empower women to solve climate change? Who wants to take a stab at that?
That's probably $1 million question. I would say, first I'd like to congratulate the Wilson Center. We have a panel of all women, so that is an amazing start. I think governments can, empower women by providing role models, and I think instances where women are seen as leaders, as experts, will encourage other women to see themselves as change makers as well. And then obviously a lot of the government initiatives that make sure that there's representation and inclusion of women will also be really important.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think there's role models on my screen here. Does anybody else want to take a stab at that? It was just a great question.
I can say something. Maybe I don't know how to do it, but it is absolutely critical that we've been talking here that we need interdisciplinarity to solve the climate change problem, as we need to solve the pandemic. That interdisciplinarity is because we need diversity of views, and that diversity we're not going to get with the usual suspects always on the table, right? So it's like, it's the low-hanging fruit. Where do you get diversity? Well, invite more women, and that's the first step that you can do. Not that we all might think the same or different. I mean, it's not intrinsically, but I mean, but the value of that. I mean, to value and to understand that it is critical at this moment to have inclusion and diversity to solve these wicked problems that we have to solve, and that the first step is to include women. I think if we get that into everybody's mindset, then we will not have exclusion of women in all of decision-making levels.
I would
Anyone else?
I would just add, I mean, I agree with both my colleagues here. You know, the fact that we have an all-women panel, I think, is always one good way to start, but then ensuring that we have diversity both in our programming, in the way that we approach a situation, but also in the solutions that we're developing. And so I think that's something that we've also actually at NASA been increasingly sensitive to. We have the Surveyor program, which is a capacity building program of NASA that's fairly well known, and gender's become a main component of the work that they're doing. And so I think on the science side, we try to ensure that the research that's being awarded is done with a diversity lens, but then the activities that we're doing on the ground through activities like Surveyor then also includes gender perspectives and other diversity in considerations as well.
Well, let me weigh in on that one. Our colleague Sarah Barnes has a ground truth briefing coming up at the end of the month on the 30th. I'm just looking at it now. It's titled COVID-19, Magnifying the World's Inequities. And it specifically calls out, it says, hear from experts on topics around women and work, caregiving, gender-based violence, racism, sexism, and healthcare access to sexual and reproductive health services, pregnancies, human settings. I mean, this is very much along the broader perspective of COVID, but also gender representation, but ripple effect of the issues that we're talking about. So thank you for your responses to that. We're trying, Jane has put a premium on making sure that, you know, our programming looks through many filters and many lenses, not just the political lens of Washington, D.C. This is certainly one of those lenses that just has to be thought through. So thank you all for responding to that. Winnie, there's a number of questions related to the Pew Project. Let me try to boil one down, if that's okay. The question really is, are your analysis, so the roadmap, the analysis behind the roadmap, are your analyses looking at the impacts of the recycle icon system, which includes the entirety non-recyclable number 6 polyestyrene, I think is what it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. That's really a very specific one. Go ahead.
Yeah, so our analysis does not, go into that level of granularity. There is a lot of granularity in our work, but that type of plastic is included in the analysis in our plastic types. We look at it not at specific polymers at this stage, but our model is capable of looking at these differences. But because we're looking at a global level across multiple plastic types and over many years, we opted to look at broader categories. So we did look at plastic as, whether it's something that could be easily recycled, more difficult, maybe nearly impossible, from a technical and economic perspective, modeled all of those to see, what comes out and how far, we can get.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Mm.
Let me ask another question, a broad question. A number of questions on global collaboration. Basically, here's one. Should we create a Nordhaus-style climate club or implementing policies globally? Question in quotes, what do you think about the implementation of the Sendai framework is being developed globally? So I think the question is kind of, what do you think about these, global frameworks, and is there a way to bring together different components in sort of the climate club concept, or network of networks, the Venn diagram of policy frameworks? I think we've touched on it a little bit on it now.
I mean, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think There's, Maisa touched on this earlier about national capacities regarding science. And so I think one of the roles, at least that NASA's taken in regard to this, is trying to support national capacities to report on Sendai frameworks and sustainable development goal indicators. And so, you know, there are a number of essentially factors that they want each country to be able to report on, either regarding the reduction of food insecurity or regarding the loss of lives regarding particular disasters. But the questions themselves are quite complex. And so I think on one hand, you've got the science support, you know, to countries helping understand, you know, what they can do to answer those indicators. But the other element is really being able to be a part of I think, a larger conversation regarding the multiple factors that come into this. The point being that climate is one element of a very complex situation. We already don't have a lot of the environmental factors understood well enough, let alone the climate elements that then cause it to be increasingly more complex. Vulnerability still remains a very large unknown for a lot of different groups of people. And so, like, the UNDRR, the Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, has begun recently, I think over the last year, developing a global risk assessment framework that tries to, I think, in part, identify opportunities to better understand how to implement the Sendai framework, but also bridge some of these gaps in understanding, going beyond the hazard to include the complexities regarding exposure, vulnerability, and what this would mean in different climate scenarios. So, I mean, I think that, you know, from a governance standpoint, it makes sense. You know, you have a broader, like, high level framework that gives you an idea, but really being able to make it impactful at the local level is what we're talking about. And so I think science and all the work that all of us are doing, frankly, plays a role in those different levels, both in informing things like the Sendai framework and the global risk assessment framework, but also then in supporting countries to be able to meet those standards.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? Because I'm refraining from doing so. Okay, we have another question for Winnie, actually. I think it actually would be for all of us. With the pandemic, many are asking to hold back disposable plastic use regulations. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, we have been observing, you know, the news and actions that are coming out regarding the plastic issue with respect to the pandemic. And, you know, it is something that we do see as a potential challenge going forward. But with the attention that plastic has garnered until recently, we know that there are a lot of stakeholders, partners, organizations who understand and recognize that this is an important environmental problem and that it isn't going to go away, even though right now our attention is on the pandemic, as it should be, but that once, you know, we get back to normal, this problem will still be there. And then with respect to, you know, single-use disposable plastics, that its contribution to the plastic pollution problem hasn't changed and will not change now or later. So I think it's challenging, no doubt, you know, given that right now we are in a world where we have to rely on certain things. But a lot of things have begun to be put in place to reduce our reliance on these types of products and materials. So I am hopeful that once the world returns to normal, that we can get back on track.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I had a conversation with some colleagues in the States about the innovation already taking place in labs to not always to replace the plastics has been there, but this pandemic has spurred innovation in many labs across not just the United States, but globally to look at this issue. There's a question, we've got about 5-8 minutes left. There's a question that it was for just one panelist, but I think goes across all. So maybe what I will do is ask the question and maybe have each of you respond in your own context. And of course, for your own organizations or you personally. And the question is this. I'm boiling it down. How and when are your divisions, so your programs, advising members of the U.S. Congress or members of leadership in Chile? So how do you advise leadership in your country, the United States Congress and the White House, the Senate, about your important recommendations? So how do you advise them about your recommendations so that your scientific and evidence-based information, is being directly reflected in new legislation? So how do you get what you see, find, need into actually legislation that really means, either regs and policies or the financial tools you need to actually do your job? So Shana, since you have the coolest logo, maybe I can lean on you a little bit, understanding full well we all work for organizations that have different protocols on those kind of issues. But how do you get your work before those who actually need to see it so that they can inform and influence policies?
I think it's a good question, but for NASA, it's probably a little bit easier maybe than others because we are a U.S. government agency. It means that we're working directly with the Office for Science, Technology, and Policy. We're reporting to Congress often on the different work that we're doing. And I think, frankly, we're currently in the planning and budget process right now to plan fiscal years 22 through 26. And so part of that is reporting on our programs and getting Congress to see the value in what we're asking for money for. And so I think that there are direct ways to get this includes my projects. I create a PPBE, a budget proposal that says, this is what I've done, this is what I'd like to do if I have this capability. And so that's one way of getting our message there across. But I think that there's multiple reporting strategies that really link, I think, with the change that we're making across the Earth Sciences Division with our government.
Great, thank you. Ruth, can I put you on the spot next?
We're a public-private institution where we're actually trust instrumentality. So we're not technically a federal agency, but certainly our scientists are asked to testify often and bring information to decision makers. And great example is before the COVID, as the US was becoming more aware of COVID, we had experts from our Global Health Initiative on the Hill briefing on virus hunting and how all this works, on the global biodiversity scale. So that's the role we tend to play, is sort of a resource that can be called upon.
Great, thank you. Maisa, maybe I can, yeah, please, thank you.
Yes, I mean, I guess we are in a very interesting moment in Chile, and I would say it's probably true for many of Chile-like countries, smaller countries still in development, but acquiring a capacity. And so I think we are at this very interesting moment where the public sector and in Congress sort of discovered actually that there was a whole community that they could actually count on. And so I have been asked in the last 2-3 months for a number of hearings actually at Congress. And and we are institutionalizing the direct work and link of the Science Committee with a number of sectorial ministries as well on climate change in particular. For the COVID crisis, there are 2 or 3 work groups in the Science Ministry that are coordinating, for example, the labs for the tests, the engineering faculties for, to produce this personal protection equipment. There's a table on data science as well, etc. So we are at this very interesting moment where we've been kind of discovered, there's all these people there at research institutes that we actually fund them, we ask them to do PhDs and have all these research programs, and we can actually use them. So it's we are at the moment in that position, and that was and I would say, and this is really important because, as I said at the beginning, what you have in the US is not the standard of the rest of the world. So there's very few countries actually that have science ministries or that have some level of science advisory really institutionalized. And back in Chile, we are at the moment here that we are starting to have it, and we see that it is being appreciated, that it is actually something very useful to have. And so if we can help other countries to have this as well, that I think would be tremendously benefit to the capacity building of our countries in all sort of different aspects.
Well, that's really good news. Thank you for that. Winnie.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think I can safely say that Pew has a good track record of sharing our research and our work with decision makers to inform their decision making. And I'm really fortunate that I have a huge team of colleagues at Pew who will support me and the plastics team in general to communicate our report, our findings with the appropriate relevant policymakers. We will have our report and we aim to distribute it widely and disseminate it to policymakers as well as businesses and other stakeholders. And we also hope to have webinars and seminars to also share the work in a virtual meeting like this, and hopefully later in the year, if it's feasible, probably also doing something in person. We have invested a lot of time and effort in this, and so have our partners. So we also anticipate that our partners will also be the ambassadors of this work and share it with their networks and really get the goal for us is to really get this to inform action and decision. As you said earlier, action. We need action, and so that is what we'll aim to do, to get this in front of as many people as possible.
Thank you. So we are right on time, which doesn't happen often, especially in the morning. So I want to thank all of you for an extraordinary discussion. It's been recorded. This has been great. Unfortunately, I have 3 pages of questions we never got to. But Winnie, to thank you, Maisa, Ruth, Shana, thank you so much for this wonderful discussion, and what a great way to start off this day. My colleague, so thank you all very, very much. My colleague there'll be a short break for a couple of minutes, and then my colleague Ann Bowser will then lead the second panel, and the second panel is entitled Looking Forward to 2070, so the next 50 years, the future of cooperation for the environment. And I think this panel has set up perfectly Ann's panel coming up. So again, I want to thank you all for an extraordinary discussion this morning, and we'll go on a short break and then come back for the second panel. Thank you all very much, and have a good rest of the day.